Hello and welcome everybody to today's Psych Bike episode. We will be continuing this month's conversation in line with Minority Mental Health Month. Today we'll be talking with Michelle Yang, MBA. Michelle is the creator of Living Well Happily, where she writes about the intersection of Asian American identity and feminism intertwined with living well with bipolar disorder. Her story is uplifting, full of love, hope, success, and everything in between. Michelle is on a personal mission to show the world that you can live well with bipolar disorder. Tired of the stigma, she is empowered to humanize and normalize mental illness as just part of our human condition. She recently quit her coveted corporate job to advocate for mental health wellness. She's writing a memoir, and she already has articles that have been featured in InStyle, HuffPost, NAMI, and other places. Good morning, Michelle, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast or webinar.
Absolutely. I thought we could start this morning by having you share just a little bit about what life was like before you received your bipolar diagnosis.
Yeah, sure. So I immigrated to the States when I was 9 years old, and I didn't receive my bipolar diagnosis until I was in college, and I'm ethnic Chinese, born in Korea, and my family was pretty a well-known family in the tight community that was ethnic Chinese in Korea. We're kind of an enclave, and we had a really strong support system. So when we immigrated to the States, it was such a drastic change, and my father in Korea was a well-respected teacher. He was in line to become the principal. He was a guidance counselor actually. And then when we moved to the States, because no one in the family spoke English, he became, the lowest ranking cook in the Chinese kitchens, that he worked at. And my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom in Korea, she started busting tables at the restaurants, and so yeah, both my parents have college degrees, but they don't speak English, and so it was a hard transition.
Yeah, it must have been really challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, what point, obviously after you got to the States, but tell us a little bit about at what point you realized that you needed additional help and support.
Yeah, it was around 5th grade, so pretty early when I first feeling very depressed, like deeply depressed, having a lot of anxiety about going to school and not being able to sleep. And I didn't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to really understand what I was going through. I just knew I was miserable. And the depressive episodes would come and go, and it worsened as I, got to high school. And I had some wonderful teachers, some really great teachers. This was in Phoenix, Arizona, and they definitely noticed that I was becoming withdrawn, like that I was not my normal self. And I think they wanted to reach out to my family and try to talk to them about it. But at the same time, they were held back by just the differences between us, because they thought, oh, well, we just don't understand because they're immigrants. And I think I remember one particular parent-teacher conference where I loved this teacher. And she was my 5th grade teacher, and she really wanted to talk to my parents. She insisted on this parent-teacher conference. And my parents brought me as a translator, as they did most of the time. And even though I told them, and I was scared, but I wanted them to talk as well because I wanted help. But my dad insisted on me coming, and then the teacher, backed off. She didn't want to talk about it in front of
to talk directly with your parents.
Exactly. And so she was like, no, everything is perfect. Everything is fine, and so my dad was basically, like, what am I doing here? Basically was, how it was. And as I got older, I remember the teachers kept talking about this. I remember, and the teachers, eventually just was like, oh, she just must be working too hard at the restaurant. because by then my family owned our own restaurant, and that's what was causing me to be exhausted and withdrawn at school.
So you had these little glimpses of support
Yeah.
from teachers, but they never really came to fruition.
Yeah.
So tell us about your first experience when you did talk with a medical professional, how that went, how it impacted you, and the ways that you thought about your health.
Yeah, so I was having such severe depression and severe manic episodes too, that at some point, because by high school, like I had taken a psychology class in high school, and I went to my parents and I was terrified, but I was like, I think I need to go see a therapist and or a psychiatrist, somebody. And my parents were terrified because they're immigrants, they're not trusting of the system, and they thought that everything was kind of connected, that if I went to see a doctor for psychological struggles, that it would end up on my permanent record, and I would not be able to get into college, I would not be able to get married, and that my life would be over. And so they were trying to protect me, but protecting me, it was misguided, and it prevented me from getting the right access to help that I needed. But when it got really bad, my dad did pull me out of school suddenly, like without warning, and took me across state lines, to California, because he wanted to take me to see a doctor off the record, and it was a trusted, a friend that he had known from Korea, her younger brother, and he was really nice, and I was so relieved and scared, and I was manic at the time. I remember being manic at the time, and I told him everything, that I was like, and I was so excited. I was like, I'm finally going to get the help that I need. I'm going to finally learn what's wrong with me. Maybe I'll get on medication, and I will finally
some kind of support resource.
Yeah, I'll finally feel better. But, I don't know. I mean, he was a family doctor. He was not a psychiatrist. He was general practice. And so after I told him everything, including, that I was having grandiose thoughts about like the movie plots were in my life, the radio was talking to me, like that sort of thing, and the long bouts of depression, he still just called my dad back into the room and said, "Your daughter's fine. She just has an overactive imagination. Make sure she gets some sleep." And it was crushing, right? It was just crushing because I thought, finally, I'm going to get help. And
your dad is reaching out, at least trying to get a resource.
Yeah, and
hopeful, and then you get this news.
And I'm sure, like, I felt like my dad was both relieved, but also still concerned at the same time, because of course they were trying to help me get some sleep this whole time. Like, it's not like that wasn't something I hadn't thought of before, that I was like, of course I can just get some sleep and then everything would be it was quite a challenge. It was very crushing, and it led to more years of struggles. Because it just made me feel like I was being a baby, right? That like, oh, this is just normal. This is just normal angst, normal being too imaginative. Like I was already internalizing a lot of my struggles, feeling alone. And when I heard that from a doctor with an MD, it felt even more so like, why can't I snap out of it? Like everybody told me to snap out of it, and it's like, if it really isn't something diagnosable, then there's just something wrong with me, and so
you're feeling more isolated and insecure and scared.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think at that time too, it's like when they look at a person, a young person, and they see that you're getting good grades, you're not doing drugs, you're not, having dangerous sex and all this stuff, because I was a very good goody, she's person. I was doing everything my parents told me to do. And so then they're not, without those risky behaviors as indicators, they really thought like, oh, she's fine.
Well, and I've talked with other people as well on our broadcasts, and we talk about how in media and Hollywood, people with mental illness are defined a certain way, and they're usually crisis or
Right.
with the law. And
Right.
so sometimes if you don't meet those criteria, like you said, you're not necessarily overlooked, but maybe misdiagnosed.
Yeah, no, I would love for us. That's one of my advocacy, like, as part of what I'm doing now for our society to broaden the definition of what a mental health condition look like, what mental illness looks like, so that when people think of somebody with bipolar disorder, just like you said, they're not immediately only thinking of the people in crisis. There's this whole other intersection of us who are in remission, like in different stages of in remission, who are carrying on very happy, productive lives. And with that segment of our population silenced or made to be in hiding because, for fear of the stigma, it's hurting both sides of of us, both the
our whole community.
Our entire community, both the people who are legitimately struggling because they are just coming to learn about it, for whatever reason, because for them, then they're not seeing the other side, right? They're not seeing what it's like to make it through the hardest part because they have no examples. Because everybody who have made it through are in hiding because they're afraid of the stigma that will be applied to them, that will affect their jobs, that will affect how their friends and peers can perceive them in the community. So yeah, and then we don't feel happy, right? Because I felt like a fraud all these years. I only came out with my story in January of 2019, and so it's only been, like 6 months that I've been talking openly about my bipolar diagnosis. And then that means for 2 decades, I felt like I had a skeleton in the closet, and an open person, that's a miserable way to live.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that and for sharing with us, because I think as more and more people do share their stories of success with bipolar and other mental illness, then it will begin to normalize conversation like, a headache or cancer or diabetes or other conditions that we manage. So I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about high school and what was it like for you living through your high school years, still at this point not diagnosed, so seemingly little support.
Yeah, it was, definitely alienating and alone, and felt very alone. It was very difficult, and it's very concerning to me, of course, and that teen suicide rates now are going up so drastically, especially for girls and for the Black population too. It's just really climbing, and I had put so much pressure on myself to succeed. I felt it from my family too, but I put it on myself as well. And so when I was manic, I would sign up for all these things. I was in all the extracurricular activities because, they said, okay, well, you're Asian, good grades is not enough. Like, you need to be in drama club and, creative writing. And, I did everything, Spanish club, everything that I could do. And I love them. I have many interests. And because my school in Korea, in contrast, like we had, no access to extracurricular activities like this. So I even though I had immigrated, several years ago by that point, like I was still grateful to have access to this sort of wonderful, enriching experiences. And so, so I would sign up, like, I'd be like really hungry to sign up for all these things. I was taking all AP classes, but then depression would hit, right? And
I was just going to say that signing up for all these activities, you're adding to the observation that you're doing okay because you're doing all these things.
Right, but then I would be so incredibly overwhelmed, right? I would be drowning, and like when everything got busy at the same time, when all the finals were going on at the same time, when the musical was happening at the same time, the paper was printing, whatever, and so, and then I would feel like a complete fraud. I would feel awful about myself. I would feel like an imposter. I would feel completely worthless, and yeah, it just often felt too much. And so it was really miserable. High school is a really, really stressful time. And yeah, I mean, I just read an article recently that it's like most of our teens are more stressed out than their parents, you know, and parents who have demanding corporate jobs as well, you know, or whatever type of demanding jobs. And I mean, I'm a parent. I have a 5-year-old, you know, so he's still little, but
coming, those teen years are coming.
yeah, before I know it, right? And but
it's true. Our teens deal with and have to manage so much more today, just in general. And then if you add mental health illness on top of it, it really could be a challenge.
Yeah, I just hope, you know, like I always, you know, hope that for myself that I'll always remember how difficult that time is, you know, and have the empathy and support for my child, you know. And after I became a vocal advocate, you know, and my first story was published in the HuffPost in May, I actually had some friends, some old friends from high school reach out to me that they were struggling with similar things in high school.
Wow.
And we never knew that about each other. Like one friend, like I talked to, she was my best friend, and we talked on the phone every day for about the most mundane things, like what are we gonna wear, you know, like that sort of thing. But she told me, you know, like she's having panic attacks and waking up at night, and you know, stuff like that. And another, you know, and another friend who also has, you know, bipolar disorder, and we just didn't know that about each other, you know, and we were each thinking there was something so wrong about us.
Yourself.
About ourselves. It was so terrible. We couldn't share it, not even with our closest friends. And we were each struggling alone when we could have been there for each other. And that's exciting, you know?
How great will it be through your work and the work of others when everyone, but especially kids in high school, adolescents, can talk to each other about it and help each other through it instead of being so isolated.
If there was no stigma, we would be able to talk to each other. If we could be able to relate to each other and, you know, and support each other, and that would be just so much better, you know?
Absolutely. What were your thoughts then at the end of high school about college? Did you ever consider skipping college? Because I know that was one of your goals. And where did you finally end up?
Yeah, no, I never thought about skipping college. You know, not only because that wasn't an option from my parents, but, you know, I was pretty a determined kid. You know, it's funny because if you look at my brother and I, on paper, it looks like he's the rebel, and I always, you know, was in line because I did everything my parents asked for as much as I could. Like I got, you know, all the good grades, and I worked really hard at the restaurant, but I had a plan. Like I wrote out a plan. Like in 7th grade, I wrote, you know, the English teacher had made an assignment that you write a letter to your senior self, you know, graduating high school, and like what would you want to accomplish between, you know, 7th grade, or actually it was 8th grade and your senior year. And I wrote down that I wanted to win a scholarship that was like, would pay for everything, you know, and so that I could choose where I wanted to study, what I wanted to study without being reliant on my parents. Because of course, like my parents were the, you know, very traditional immigrant parents, in that they wanted me to be either a doctor or a lawyer, you know, and I did not want
choices.
I wanted more than 2 choices. I was like, well, I don't know, like I could be a lawyer, but I was like, you know, but I also knew I wanted more than those 2 choices. I wanted to be able to make my own decisions. And so I knew that financial independence was the key, and then a scholarship was my ticket out, you know, and so that's what I did, and that's why I put so much pressure on myself, and I did achieve it. I got the most prestigious scholarship in Arizona that was, you know, really generous and paid for study abroad, as well as covered, you know, all the tuition, room and board, and so yeah, I never considered not going to college.
Not going to school.
Yeah, and because it was my only way to independence, you know, and that's why I ended up at the University of Arizona, because it was an in-state scholarship. Yeah.
That's great. Would you share with us at what point you realized you were experiencing your first psychotic episode and everything that entailed?
Yeah. So, you know, so in high school, I never got any real proper help that I needed. So I was actually entering college, had already was like, okay, in college I can go to campus health. I can get some help that I need. And so and moving, it's very exciting, right? Moving into the dorms, and I was manic pretty quickly. And so I had gone to campus health, but because they knew I was the Flynn Scholar, I'm a Flynn Scholar,
scholarship, so you must be okay.
They were like, oh, we get you guys all the time. It's like, it's anxiety kind of comes with the high pressure, high achievement, and so they just gave me Valium to help me sleep, or and it was just like, oh, and no real diagnosis at the time. Wow. And I did great. I loved college. I loved, being independent. And I was super excited about the study abroad that was part of the scholarship. And so I went to study abroad in China in my junior year. And not long after I arrived, 9/11 happened. And which was, that was a very difficult time for the entire nation, and then to be in a different country at the time was really surreal, right? And so all the American students, like, we gathered around the TV. It was like 9 a.m. over there, and we watched the towers fall, and it was so surreal, like we were watching a movie clip or something, but it was real life. And it was and it was just a really hard time because I'm from Arizona, and Beijing is really cold. And it was the winter semester, so I was freezing. I wasn't leaving the dorm very often. I felt alone. I felt removed from the support system, and I was like under a lot of stress, and I got depressed and lonely, and that's. I experienced my first, or not, it wasn't my first, because I think I experienced psychosis in high school as well, but it was the first place that I experienced a pretty major psychotic episode, where all the people around me were people that didn't know me, and that didn't know that, like, oh, this is Michelle Yang. She has a reputation of high achievement. So whatever is happening now, like, that's not her. Yeah, whereas these people, they don't know me. They're like, what is happening with that girl in that dorm room, And so, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because, like, what actually, like, pushed me over the edge, like, my dad did ask me to do something kind of unreasonable, but, like, to him, he was like, oh, you're in China, so just go to this place and do this
down the street. It's in China.
But it's like, it was an overnight train away. It was during finals time at the end of my semester abroad, and so I had all these things to do, and I was trying to explain that, like, no, I'm actually not in a good place right now, but he was like, you have to do this, and then when you feel worthless already, and like, I just remember having this almost like out of body sort of psychotic episode, and so I don't know, somebody in my program, another student, called the program director, and she called my dad, who flew to Beijing to get me within like 2 days, and he was sobbing when he got to my door, and like, and it's because it's like, of course he didn't really didn't really comprehend, like, the state that I was in when he made his request, right? And so or made his demand, rather. If I'm fair, but of course he's not intending to hurt me, but yeah, it's hard, because it's with your family. They often are the ones who push your buttons and give you a lot of grief, but they also are there to catch you and take care of you, and nurse you back to health. And it's a hard place to be. I'm still making peace with that, I think a lot of people are. Yeah.
And I'm sure, now as a parent, he had every great intention for you, but seeing you like that, I'm sure, was heartbreaking for him as well. So it's just mending all that pain and moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done with reducing stigma for people living with all types of mental illness. And we often refer to them as cultural stigmas and how it can add additional barriers to gathering support. And I know that you have some thoughts about confining stigma to culture and how that affects people. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about that, how that affected you as a young Asian American woman.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I'm totally an advocate for separating culture from trauma, because that's, I think, how we stop the cycle of trauma from continuing. The cycle of, often, like for my family, my, parents believed in corporal punishment, and a lot of states in the U.S. still, allow that. I think isn't it about half that it's
about half, yes.
That still it's condoned in the schools, and they still do paddling, and and actually a lot of the Asian countries have already outlawed it. China since the 50s, Taiwan, Korea, they've all outlawed it. So it's not like progress is possible. Progress is happening. Not only possible, it's happened, and so it's just taking time for people to catch up. But if we forever marry the two of cultural, blaming everything on the culture, that is not empowering. That is not empowering, or whatever, Asian American is a catch-all term, but there's so many countries in Asia, right? And so I'm ethnic Chinese from Korea, but it's like we use the catch-all term, but if we say everything is, it's in your culture there's extra stigma, in your culture you always have this extra pressure, in your culture you always beat your kids to succeed, like all these things, it's not unique to our culture, it's prevalent in many cultures. It's a human experience, and actually it's tragic, but white Americans actually have the highest suicide rates among all different ethnicity groups. But we never call out white culture is the culprit, for why there's such high suicide rates. I had an experience where I went to see a therapist for the first time, and she wasn't listening to me. She kept saying, your people are only concerned with honor and respect. Wow. Your people, and she just came saying, your people are concerned with honor. And I kept trying to interject, but she wasn't hearing me. Like, she was so eager to inform me of everything she knew about my people. And, and I was like, what's my people? Because I, as somebody who's always been sort of displaced as Chinese in Korea and then immigrated, I'm like, I don't know, like what's my people? Because honestly,
who are my people?
Yeah, I think my people is actually when I first walked into a NAMI bipolar support group. That's when I found my people, and so, and she doesn't know that. She didn't know anything about me because it was our first meeting. And I know she wasn't malicious. I think she might have gone to a, like cultural sensitivity training for mental health providers, like that sort of thing, which are all really well-intentioned. But I think, to listen it should be first and foremost. If I had just gone in and I was a white person, she wouldn't say, oh, your people, right? Like, she would be listening to why I walked into her office in the first place,
as an individual.
And I think, like, she meant well. She absolutely meant well, right? Like, she wanted, I'm sure there was discomfort there. Like, because it was the first meeting, she wanted to prove to me that she understood. She was, so she was trying to prove to me that she understood my background, that she would be a good therapist for me, but it actually, for me, proved the opposite, right? Because it was her discomfort speaking, and that sort of thing I experience all the time, like with personal trainers, like whatever, like they say people of your culture, your people. And so it's like, I just want to make a public service announcement that, like, if you're trying to make a sale, never say your people, it will not, for me, it doesn't work. So I mean, I think it's the same for Black communities, Native American communities, Hispanic, whatever marginalized communities. I just hope that we separate trauma from culture when we talk about it, because
it almost lends as a validation or excusing behavior.
Exactly.
Really
Because if you continue to marry the two, you know, I've had to process a lot for me to come to this point, right? Like, you're asking me to reject my culture in order to heal, and that's not going to happen because it's me. Like, my culture is part of me, and we can't love ourselves if you keep blaming blaming culture. And so, you know, that means we will never be empowered. And to truly heal, we have to be empowered. To truly stop the cycle, we have to be empowered and make progress. And so I really think it's really dangerous to blame culture, and I really hope that there's a way that we can move past that and stop making generalizations, you know. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the perspective, and like I said, we have some ways to go, but each step gets us further. You talked a little bit about the work that you've done in all of this, and so can you share with us a little bit about how you did turn the corner into wellness and some of the strategies and techniques that you've developed and learned over the years?
Absolutely. So I was diagnosed when I was 20, when I came back from China, and I went through the same thing a lot of people with bipolar disorder do. At first, the psychiatrists try to say, oh, it's major depressive disorder, it's unipolar, you know, and then they put you on antidepressants. They put me on antidepressants, which sent me into a major manic episode.
Right.
And they go, okay.
That happens so often.
Yeah, so
diagnosis,
right.
Escalating.
And actually, it's not really a misdiagnosis from what my psychiatrist was said. It was almost like a diagnosis by trial.
The process of it.
Yeah, because like it's not like you can take a blood test and see that there's bipolar disorder. Not yet, as far as I know. So it was like a way, even though it's risky, to see how you react to the medication is almost a test to see if
it's telling, right?
Bipolar. At least that was in my case. And so yes, it turned out I was bipolar, and so I was hospitalized, and I got put on a mood stabilizer that has now worked for me for, you know, going on 2 decades now. Like, I feel like I'm really lucky that it has worked so well for me. And yeah, I mean, medication makes such a difference. And it was hard for me to, you know, for some reason, people ask me, like, how did you not have any denial into like what you had? Like, how did you like want to get well, you know, and take medication? And I'm like, because I was so miserable in my psychosis. I'm like, I never wanted to revisit that. Like, you know.
And you had a lot of experience prior to diagnosis. I would imagine that getting a diagnosis provided some hope that there was a path to wellness.
Right. And, you know, and actually, I mean, age 20 is still relatively young. And so I feel like I'm really lucky that I was shielded from what a lot of people have had to do, you know, when they can't access help, because then they self-medicate and it can spiral to more dangerous, you know, often addictive things that can get even more harmful. So yeah, medication, therapy, I got into relatively early. My parents, you know, actually there's a lot of fear against medication, you know. They see it as something you'll get addicted to, even because they don't understand the difference between, you know, like a mood stabilizer and something that is truly addictive. And they kept trying to tell me, like, oh, you don't need it anymore. Like, you're well now. You're doing well now.
I'm well because I'm taking my medication.
Exactly. And so it was, yeah, one of my early things that I had to like stand up against my parents for, you know, although by that point I had done some other things too, but yeah, so I've always avoided other drugs, and, you know, and alcohol. There's some alcoholism in my family. So that wasn't too hard for me, I don't think, because I've seen the harm that it had done. So actually, I see that as lucky that I never tried to self-medicate with alcohol. And now, like, I avoid caffeine because I'm so sensitive to it. Like, I protect my sleep. So number 1 is medication for me. Number 2 is sleep, because like sleep is the first indicator of like something is not wrong or something is not well. And so
sleep is incredibly important for all of us, but especially
Right, and both alcohol and caffeine can mess with my sleep so much that I avoid both as much as I
It's
can.
not worth it.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, seeing a doctor, a psychiatrist, and therapist regularly for me, it's kind of one of the reasons I quit my coveted corporate job, because I was doing well, and that was the thing for me to go, because it was so inconvenient for me to leave my job to go to see a therapist regularly, or a psychiatrist regularly. I should have made it a priority. Like, I can be a little less dedicated to my job and more dedicated to my mental health, and that would have been okay, and my job would have been okay with it, but it was me, and it was like, it's a thing that I'm still working through, and so yeah, that is so important, so key to your healing and processing. And then nurturing a support network has been really important. I think, like I said, I've been co-facilitating a NAMI support group for over 3 years now, and it's been amazing. It's actually been very vital, very fundamental to my progress, and what has made me empowered enough to become a advocate, right? Because otherwise I would have been hiding still, and so yeah, I can't say enough about the support group. And also, it doesn't have to be a mental health support group, like your family and friends,
right? Your wellness team,
but also I make a point to, you always have to you should show up for them as well, unless you're really not well, and then they will understand. But when it counts, you have to show up. Like, my brother's getting married, I'm gonna show up even though it's not convenient for me right now, you have to do it, and because you want them to show up for you too,
that's a really great point. When you're part of a community or a support team, like you said, when you're doing well and you can, but it's a two-way.
Right. Yeah, and routine is also really helpful. Like, I thrive on routine, and yeah, it's I don't know, I'm kind of have a lot of things that I do to make sure that I am managing my condition well, and living happily. I love having my dog, to be able to walk my dog. Like, I think our animals are so wonderful, and they understand us on a level that often other people can miss on the cursory level. And being mindful of my triggers and setting boundaries, which can be really hard, but like, now, it's like, show up when you need to show up for your friends, but you also need to set boundaries when because it's self-care, right? Take care of yourself. Exactly, that leads to like my final point of like really needing to be kind to yourself, because it's easy to get to that negative talk and that imposter syndrome, and I often have to very consciously like make a list of things that it's like, okay, not everybody hates me, because this and this wouldn't have happened if people did hate me. If I was really thinking, if I was really like this, I wouldn't have this life, like that sort of thing. Like, it's a conscious exercise that I have to put myself through. Yeah.
I love that point, because I think just in general, we tend to take care of everybody else around us, our family, friends, coworkers, what have you, and then we forget about ourselves a lot of times. So be kind.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing all the ways you've gotten to where you are. And with that, I would love to hear how you're doing now, day to day, and what some of your hopes are for the future.
Yeah, I'm happier than ever now. I honestly, like, I never imagined as somebody that I would be somebody who would like have another dramatic career change at age 38. Like, once I got my MBA, and I was, working at nonprofit for a while, and then I, got into kind of the corporate world sort of by accident, but it's such a secure income that you make, it's such
it's kind of scary to leave.
Yeah, and it's a part of culture that like everybody's in this race, that I didn't see myself leaving it for years, until retirement. And so this really came unexpected. But I'm, like I said, happier than ever. I feel more fulfilled than I have ever before in my life. And I just really just feel it in my core that I'm on the right path. I know it sounds cheesy, but
no, it doesn't. That's so great.
Yeah, and you know, Toni Morrison once said, like, if there's a book you really want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And so I decided to write a book, which is like, it was like, wow, you know, really, really kind of out there. But honestly, when I was 20 and my respite, my sanctuary was always the Phoenix Public Library that was down the street from my parents' restaurant. I don't know what I would have done without that restaurant or without that library. It really, I was friends with all the librarians. It was like super amazing to have that just at my fingertips. So when I was diagnosed and terrified, I went to the library and I really looked for a book that I could relate to. But there wasn't one from a person of color. There was very few at that time because this was like, you know, it was like year 2000.
Very early in our
yeah. And so so I know there were like some books had been published by that point, I think, but like it was very few that I could find. And even now, when I look at what is available, very few written by people of color, written by somebody with an immigrant lens, with an Asian American lens, and I think that there's room for my story because this is a book that I wanted to read, you know, that everything is going to be okay.
Find it. Yeah.
And I still can't find it, that, you know, that is like everything is going to be okay, you know, that I still was able to go on and I'm not a burden to other people. You know, I'm a productive member of society. I'm, you know,
family.
I'm a
child.
Yeah, so much. I have so much fun as a mom. I know I'm a great mom. You know, I'm a great partner to my husband, and this label of being mentally ill, don't let it define you. You know, you're still the person that you are, and so I want this. I wish that I could have read this book, had this sort of person that I could look to when I was first diagnosed and in that really terrified place. And so that's why I'm, everything I'm doing is kind of working toward that. I know I'm writing articles and everything, but it's really building up to being able to share my story. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Well, before I let you go, are there any last thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with those of us that are managing bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I mean, just really simple about, you know, don't give up hope. Like, I was hospitalized twice. You know, I've been to some really dark places. And I know when you are in the throes of it, it really feels like it's never gonna get better, but it does get better. You know, you do get through it. And the key is that believing, just keeping the belief, keeping the hope that it gets better, and that you're not alone, right? And these trials, it won't be happening forever. And if more of us who are living well with bipolar disorder share our stories, it's going to be easier for other people who are experiencing it, you know, for the first time, who are in that really in the crisis mode. Yeah. And we are all in it together. Like, we are not a small number, you know, like this is a, you know, and it really should be more normalized and more, there should be more empathy and, you know, and no stigma around it, and certainly no discrimination. And so I know there's a lot of work to be done, but that is not to be internalized by us who live with bipolar disorder. Yeah. And always to keep up hope and do your best, you know, and take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourself. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I, again, thank you so much for sharing your time and contributing to these little steps of normalizing and destigmatizing. I know that your story is going to be able to help and support so many people that get a chance to view it. So thank you again so much, and continue living well.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate you as well and everything you do.